Hey everyone, my name is Janet. Now let's dim the lights.
Oh, the horror!
I think this is just how every video is going to start. There's so much activity on my street. I am sorry if you can hear this. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to have you here. If you're new, welcome. If you watched my last episode, welcome back. Also, side note, watching that last episode, as I was editing it, I realized that the last camera owner of this camera that I bought off of Facebook Marketplace had some weird facial filter blurring on. So I apologize if my face is just completely blurry in that first episode. I did not choose to put some weird, pretty Instagram filter on my face. So this is the real me. I can't wait to get into today's topic. But first, I just kind of wanted to catch you guys up on my weekend that I had. So last episode, I had mentioned that I was going to a cemetery ghost tour. And I just kind of wanted to share that experience with you guys because it is very on brand and holy shit. So I thought it was going to be this awesome historical kind of walk through the cemetery. There were already some ghost stories shared about it. So I was like, all right, it's just like a spooky cemetery. And the tour guide, who was this classic fedora wearing older gentleman who just loves all things paranormal. He was wonderful. And I thought he was just kind of going to lead us through the ghost yard. I guess it was a ghost yard, the cemetery, and tell us ghost stories. What I didn't realize was that it would be comprised of mostly amateur paranormal investigators. So everyone but us came equipped with like body cams and EVP meters and spirit boxes and the Oculus 5000 and just all sorts of crazy equipment. And it's pretty much just a ghost hunting free-for-all. Sadly, P and I did not catch anything ourselves because I don't think that I am a spiritual medium as much as I try. I think the more that I want it, the less they want to talk to me. And that's okay. You know what? I get it. But there were a couple of occurrences that I got to witness and listen back through firsthand. There was no way to explain how it didn't happen. So this one woman was posted up by a grave and she had her phone out recording and she was just asking it questions and there was a name on the grave and she asked, is anyone by this last name here with me? And I kid you not, I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about it. She asked that question and immediately into the recording, like into the phone, there was this voice, this disembodied voice that sounded like a man's voice. And I don't even know how to explain it, but the way that it came out in the recording didn't sound like someone even speaking into a phone if it were possible. It was truly a ghostly whisper. And it said, bad girl. And I swear to God, my face is even getting tingly right now. It was incredible. I've just been wanting to have proof, unmistakable proof, not through like a ghost hunting show or through a story someone told. I heard it. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about the reason that you're all here and that I'm here. Let's talk about the movie, The Sadness. I watched this last night and I honestly wasn't planning to record it for a couple more days, but I'm dying to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it. It was wild. Okay, there is so much to be said about this movie that I am actually going to include a spoiler section at the end for anyone who wants to go a little bit further into the interpretation of the movie. Don't worry, I will give you fair warning before we jump into that section. I'll do a little mini closeout before that, just so that you can turn off the video when I'm done. So here we go. Sadness is a 2021 Taiwanese film directed by Rob Jabaz, and it is available on VOD. I believe it's on Shudder, May 12th. And so it isn't actually out yet, but I managed to find it on the interwebs, and I just couldn't wait to watch it because it just looked so amazing from the trailer. So this movie, which is heavily based off of a comic book series called Crossed, features two main characters who are in a couple, Kat and Jim. And they're a young couple who are kind of just stuck in this mundane routine of life. And right as the movie starts, we just jump straight into it. In the first few minutes, Jim is driving Kat to work, and on the way there, they witness a very gruesome, bloody scene with policemen and a bloody body bag. Bloody body bag. Say that 10 times fast. After he drops Kat off, he goes into a restaurant for breakfast, and there we see our first zombie. Now, I really don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to try to tiptoe around how the rest of the story unfolds. But basically, this is a love story between Kat and Jim as they try to reconnect and find each other in the midst of this raging pandemic. Little backstory about this virus. It is a pandemic that has been raging for about a year, but because there are no deaths caused by the pandemic, the government is kind of keeping it hush-hush. They're just saying there's no need to worry because nobody's died, and then suddenly the deaths start occurring. And not just deaths. The craziest part about this is that as people are turning, I guess you could say, or being affected by the virus, they aren't losing their human characteristics. As quoted in the film, you see ordinary civilians turn into homicidal, sadistic maniacs. So you pretty much have these villains who have all the functionality of human beings, all the thought processes, and all of the physical abilities of humans. But the only difference is there is essentially no longer a moral compass. As the movie progresses, Kat is trying to make her way to a hospital and to get Jim to meet her there, and chaos absolutely ensues. But because I can't really say much more about the plot without spoiling it, we are just going to go straight into my impressions. It is such a breath of fresh air from every other zombie apocalypse movie that we've seen, because instead of them turning into these creatures per se that can't, I guess it depends on the world that's been established, but like some zombies can't climb ladders and some zombies can't open doors, and there's always debilitating factors. But in this movie, nothing is off the table. I wouldn't even go nearly as far to call them zombies because they are so human in every characteristic. Arguably, after you're infected, you become more human in the sense of just getting straight to your subconscious desires and wants. We're basically invited to look into this whole post-apocalyptic version of humanity that the writer-director has created. And it is astounding and terrifying without the mask of society and morality and everything like that. Who do we become when all of that is stripped away? And the answer is fucking terrifying zombies. I also want to point out that the film draws a lot of attention to the crazy political climate of Taipei at the time, and very much strings it along throughout the whole movie as kind of an explanation for how the pandemic got as bad as it did. Although, as I mentioned, this film was based off a comic book series, I was so curious to know when it was filmed because the ties that it has to our current pandemic is wild. But it was filmed in the very beginning of the pandemic. At the very core, the theme of this film is science versus politics. And doesn't get much realer than that. Much realer? More real? More real than that. The beginning of the film features an interview with Dr. Wong, who shows up later in the film, and he's talking about how we need to be more alarmed about this virus, and that we need to be quarantining, and that we need to be staying home if we're sick, and all these things, versus a broadcast by the president who's saying everything is fine, there's no need to panic, there are no deaths recorded thus far, and we don't need to worry about it. So at first I thought the film was kind of like a propaganda piece to warn us against vulgarity and sexuality. But it turns out that there is so much more behind it. And what is amazing about this movie is it takes all of these extremes to kind of see what is happening right in front of our faces. All throughout the movie, there are little hints dropped here and there of, I guess you would say, early warning signs of what that person might be like once they're transformed. Because the whole thing is you become a worse version of yourself. It's not like after you're transformed, everyone becomes one flat zombie character. No, it takes everything, all of your own wants and all of your own desires, and amplifies them to a terrifying degree. There were some strong anti-patriarchal themes in this film. Pretty much the entire film as it progresses is an expose on how terrifying men can be. The writer-director is a white male. And so I loved that, honestly, because it felt like it gave the theme a lot more credence, because this is a white man talking about how f***ed up men can be. I won't go any further than that, but I would say if you watch this film, pay a lot of attention to how the men who are infected act and how the women do. And obviously it is far more intricate than that. There's politics involved, there's science involved, there's ego involved, all of it, everything. This film brushes on everything. And for that reason, it is absolutely incredible and goes so much further than just a gory, gruesome zombie movie, which it also is in the best way. And in my spoiler section, I will go over a couple of the best kills because this film had them. It had so many ridiculous, grindhousey moments. I would honestly say the whole film itself is pretty grindhouse, other than the fact that the production value was great. I was reading about the making of this film, and what's interesting is that normally with a modern day zombie movie with so much gore and so many buckets of blood, you would assume that there would be a handful of digital effects, mostly digital effects. But actually, most of the effects in this movie were practical, which makes it that much better because the blood is just this thick, syrupy, I give it a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10, amazing, wouldn't do anything differently about it. That concludes the spoiler-free section of this episode. I have been biting my tongue this entire time, and I cannot wait to get into a couple of the spoilers. Again, I'm not going to ruin everything, and there's too much to talk about anyways to really go into full detail about it. I don't know if this movie is going to blow up, but I have a feeling that it's probably going to be pretty low on the radar for most people unless you're really, really into and up on the horror news. So I hope that I can recommend movies that you may not have heard of, that you are kind of on the fence about seeing, or just anything that might convince you to go out and just watch another scary movie. So if this is where we're parting ways, I want to say thank you for watching this video. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe, because hopefully I will be posting more than once a week eventually when I get the hang of this and I actually can edit in less than 15 hours. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week. Okay, we're back. You probably don't know that I even left, but since that last outro, I have been dealing with issue after issue with this camera. I apologize if the lighting has changed at all, because I also realized that I've had my across the apartment blinds open this whole time, which probably made it really bright in here. I'll make this short and sweet because I maxed out my memory card on my camera, so obviously I'm talking too much. So there was that train scene that I kind of mentioned in the beginning of the film. Kat is sitting on the train, and the older gentleman sitting next to her kind of looks over and he says, "Hey, what are you reading?" Yada yada, tries to kind of strike up an innocent enough conversation. And she's at first being very polite about it. Then he keeps pressing and asking her to explain the book. And then he puts his arm on her and she turns to him and she snaps and she says, "Excuse me, I don't know what you're doing, you pervert," or something along the lines of that, but basically tells him to fuck off. And he gets really uncomfortable and angry, but doesn't do a whole lot. Just kind of sits back in his seat and he looks down and he starts mumbling like, "Oh, these pretty girls just think because they're pretty, they can treat you like and all this kind of stuff. And then after he turns, he becomes the main villain of her story. And all of this kind of derived from how she basically mugged him off on the train. And we see a little bit of the result of that in regular society, which was him muttering under his breath and insulting her, but he didn't do anything. But as soon as he turns into zombie version of him, he goes wild. And he literally says at one point, "I'm going to fuck you to death." Another point, she borrows a man's phone, and his background is a picture of a cartoon woman's boobs. And finally, towards the end of the movie, when she meets this doctor, Dr. Wong, who was featured in the beginning of the film, he's this voice of authority, and he's supposed to be this comforting figure to her. However, as she's in there with him, you get this sense the entire time that something is wrong and that his intentions aren't pure. And that feeling is confirmed when he asks her to take off all her clothes and then starts asking her while she's undressing if she's had any children and telling her that she's lucky she's never had children. And at one point, she asks him to turn around so he's not looking at her. And he's looking at her in the mirror directly in front of him. So essentially he's watching her undress. All of these little things throughout that we see in the men before they change are warning signs to us. The only reason that we have to act moral is because society has set a standard to act moral. But if that standard didn't exist, we would all be raping and murdering each other. It's really terrifying to think about, honestly, and that is the true horror of this movie. Before I go, I just want to share one of my favorite moments from this film. I guess it was multiple moments, but the businessman that we were talking about earlier at one point stabs a woman's eye out with his umbrella, and then later on in the movie proceeds to have sex with the hole. And it's a decently long take. If you get queasy easily, I would say maybe this isn't the movie for you. Of course, there's so many other facets to it that make it worth watching, but the gore is a huge part of it and pretty much unavoidable, and it's really intense. So thank you for sticking around if you made it past the spoiler-free and the spoiler section, and we will see you next week.